I'm going to talk about if your waters break. Now, I said already that your waters will either go right at the very start of your labour and then contractions will start, or they'll go right at the end of the labour. You might be due to have your baby, or it might be premature. Whenever. If you think your waters have broken, you need to phone the hospital. Ideally, it's going to be a clear straw colour. It doesn't tend to have a smell to it. It doesn't smell like urine. Your urine might be really weak, but it really doesn't smell like that anyway. It might be, if you look at our little diagram here that we had earlier, if it goes here and your baby's head is like a plug, it might just be like a little puddle and you're not quite sure if it's gone or not, your waters have gone or not, or your membranes have ruptured is the other term we use. What we'll say to you is put a pad on, see what happens in the next hour or so. And if it is your waters, as your baby moves or every contraction you have, some more fluid will dribble down around the side of the baby's head. And you can see here on this one as well, can I get it over? Can you see how it is like a little puddle there? So it's a tiny little bit that might come round, but remember I said there's 1.5 litres in there, so all that's going to just carry on trickling. So put a pad on, see what happens, give the hospital a ring. If it's the middle of the night and you're absolutely fine, they won't have you rushing in all guns blazing. They'll go through that assessment that Rachel just mentioned now, is your baby moving, how many weeks pregnant you are, what colour the fluid is, and if you're happy to stay at home, then that's perfectly fine. Ideally though, you're in labour within 24 hours of your waters breaking, and your baby is in your arms within 48 hours. So if your waters have broken and you haven't gone into labour, we would call you into hospital usually within the first 12 hours or so after your waters breaking, if you're not in labour by then, just to see whether it is your waters have broken. Sometimes if we've got a bit of a hot weather or you're at home with your heating on full blast, it makes your vaginal mucus quite watery, so lots of women think their waters have gone when it isn't. It's a very common thing, don't worry about it. Or sometimes if it's a tiny little puddle, it could be your waters have broken, but you really don't think it is because it's just been so little. So you need to be examined. It would be a speculum examination, like if you've ever had a smear, okay? So vaginal examination where they open up the speculum and have a look at the cervix just to see if there's any fluid around there. If your waters have broken and you're not in labour, then the idea then is that your labour needs to start for the safety of your baby. That protective bag has been broken around your baby, so the risk of infection is high. So that we'll talk about induction of labour with you in a little bit, and a couple more clips down the line. But that's what will happen if your waters break and you haven't gone into labour. But ideally, your labour will start naturally within the first 24 hours of your waters breaking. If you go into the hospital and your labour hasn't started but your waters have definitely broken, what they'll offer you is something called a stretch and sweep. Now we naturally offer this to women when they're about 41 weeks if their labour hasn't started already. And a stretch and sweep is a vaginal examination. Go back to my diagram again, thank you. Vaginal examination. So the midwife will examine you vaginally, and well, the cervix is quite far open there, but if I go back to an earlier labour one, and the idea is it stretches open the cervix here and sweeps around just around the baby's head here. And the idea of that is to stir up your hormones, that lovely oxytocin, to get your body to at least think about labour and for labour to start naturally itself. So that's something we would offer you if your waters have broken and you haven't gone into labour. The colour of the fluid, I think I mentioned it earlier, it needs to be a nice clear straw-like colour. If it's a dirty brown colour or a bit of pea soup-ish, your baby may well have had a little poo inside you. Some overdue babies do this naturally. I think it's to pass the time. And then it might be a very, very translucent green colour. We don't especially worry about that. But if it's a thicker, gloopy colour, then it might be a bit fresher. So we'd be a bit more concerned. Either way, we would want you to attend the hospital because we would want to just check on the well-being of your baby to make sure everything is okay.